returning to the general election. After not appearing in public yesterday, today the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, is set to deliver his first keynote speech of the campaign.
Now, Sir Keir Starmer is expected to outline economic security, border security and national security. So it's all security. These are the three pillars forming the bedrock of the Labour Party's campaign.
Meanwhile, the Prime Minister is staging a fight back after announcing plans yesterday to introduce national service for 18-year-olds should his government be re-elected. Earlier, we spoke to the Minister of State for Indo-Pacific, Anne-Marie Trevelyan.
Part of our commitment to helping our young people to discover their best selves, to be able to, a number of them, apply and get a year's commission with our armed forces. But of course, the vast majority will be committing to a regular drumbeat of community work with their local, special constables, NHS, RNLI, any number of those.
Well, to continue the discussion, we're joined now by the political editor at the Daily Express, Sam Lister, and political editor, and we've got Matt Goodwin, haven't we?
Yeah.
Matt Goodwin, yes.
Goodwin.
So let's start with...
Morning, Michael.
Hello, Matthew Goodwin. Sorry, just had a slight problem with that. Matthew, I wonder how you feel about the Conservative Prime Minister promising an increase in the size of the state and an increase in public expenditure, which are part and parcel of this national service commitment.
Well, I think it's a great question. It's also great to be with you this morning. I think what we're seeing, Michael, is a continuation, if you like, of this post-Brexit consensus. We've got a politics now organised around a big state, big spending, big tax, lots of migration, lots of things I think voters are probably looking at, including Conservative ones, and saying, well, hang on a minute, this isn't what I thought I was getting when I voted for Brexit in 2016 and Boris Johnson in 2019. On the specific pledge of national service, though, the one thing I would point out, Michael, is that compulsory military service polls terribly. People don't like it. They don't like the idea of their son or daughter being forced off into national service. But voluntary military or community national service, which the government would argue is what it's doing, actually polls really well. We had some YouGov polling at the end of last year, which showed that about 2/3 of the country quite like the idea of their son or daughter going off to contribute to the economy or perhaps spending some time in the military. So I'm not quite sure the reaction to this policy is quite right. Polling-wise, it actually does pretty well out there in the country.
Is volunteering popular in the polls when it's involuntary, which is what is being proposed, because people are being told they've got to volunteer, which makes it not volunteering?
It's mandatory.
Yeah, I think it depends on the detail. There's sort of we're seeing the military component being toned down. We're seeing other parts of it being talked about in terms of contributing to things like search and rescue, ambulances, things that a bit more community oriented. So when you look at it through that lens, I'm not entirely sure that it is as unpopular out there as many people have been suggesting. But look, I mean, at the end of the day, Rishi Sunak's got to start this campaign in a way that outflanks everybody. He's got to drop a number of announcements, not just on this issue, but many others, that really convey to the British public, or at least give them a reason to look at the Conservative Party again for another 5 minutes after 14 years of governance. And if he can do that, if he can start some kind of conversation about the values that he's holding, the kind of things he wants to do to the country, he might just have a shot, not at winning this election. I don't think anybody thinks the Conservatives are going to win this election. But look, they might have a shot at narrowing the race and pushing Labour into some kind of hung parliament situation, which on current polling would be a good outcome.
Sam Lister, what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's clearly a deeply divisive policy, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, I think the Conservatives have seized the agenda here. They've got everybody talking. It's dominated the airwaves for the last 2 days. It's dominated the print press and our online offshoots. And so I think that's quite important in that early stage of the campaign. And when it comes to the policy itself, I mean, clearly, we are at a dangerous point in the world, and we've got the Defence Secretary, Grant Shapps, writing for us today, and he says it's time for Britain to toughen up. Russia is not. Russia has no qualms about these kinds of things. We as a nation have to be ready for what comes next. And when you have troubles in the Red Sea, troubles in obviously in Gaza, you have Russia obviously encroaching into Europe in the fringes, then you have to be ready. And I think that's part of this. Clearly, though, this is not about conscription. This is about trying to get young people, trying to give them opportunities in life, trying to give them skills. The military is an option for that. But if you don't want to do that, and I think probably I would not have chosen that option if I was 18, then you have the option of community service, as it were. And that's so there is an alternative there.
I was just going to ask you, Sam, why do you think it's been receiving such bad press then? Because even the Daily Mail is, ridiculing it. You've got the Guardian saying that it's bonkers. Why do you think these publications are ridiculing it so badly, especially given the global situation that we're in?
Well, I mean, you'd expect it from the Guardian, wouldn't you? I mean, they're
but
not
the Daily Mail as well.
Well, the Daily Mail's an interesting case. Obviously, it had Rachel Reeves on its front page on Saturday. They seem to be playing an interesting game during this election. They are obviously courting the Labour Party in a way. They're flirting with them, which is an interesting tactic. I don't know if that's where their readers are. I mean, certainly my readers are not in that position. They look to the Conservative Party. They also look to reform, but they certainly don't particularly look to Labour Party for solutions for things.
Matthew Goodwin, it emerged yesterday at GBNews that Nigel Farage would have run for Parliament. He would have been part of the campaign had the election been called later in the year. This seemed actually to give a justification for what Rishi Sunak had done, calling the election on the 4th of July. He wrong-footed Nigel Farage, and an awful lot of Conservative candidates will be very relieved that Nigel Farage is not part of it. So should we now revisit the decision that Sunak made to call the election, which many people criticise, and say it looks like he got that one right?
Well, I think certainly if he wants to neutralise the threat from Nigel Farage, that was probably a good first move. At the same time, we also read over the weekend, of course, Michael, that he's alienated a number of his cabinet colleagues and senior Conservatives who weren't expecting the election. So I think there are trade-offs here. But the interesting thing about Nigel Farage and reform for me, look, firstly, in all of the polls we've had since Rishi Sunak called the election, there's been no evidence at all yet that the Conservatives are squeezing that Reform Party vote. Secondly, I noticed that Farage has qualified his language, if you like. He said actually he is going to be campaigning. He's just not going to be running as an MP. And we saw over the weekend him make a number of pretty strident interventions on that issue of immigration and also integration in Britain, which leads me to a third point, Michael, which is what I think we're going to see here. In fact, I've written about it this morning, is a core vote strategy for reform. What they're going to do is go out into this election campaign and talk about little else than immigration and the effect it's having on the country. Now, why is that important? Well, because we know that it's the number one issue for 2019 Conservative voters. It's the number one issue for Reform Party voters. So if Farage and Richard Tice are going to try and stop the squeeze of the Reform Party's vote, the only way they can really do that is by banging on and on and on and on and on about immigration and attacking the Conservatives for their record on that issue. And Michael, you'll remember 2015. This is exactly what Farage did with UKIP in 2015, and the end result, well, nearly 13%. OK, they got one seat, but actually David Cameron and the Conservatives didn't really manage to squeeze that UKIP vote down as much as they wanted. They had to instead focus on destroying the Liberal Democrats. So this is going to get really interesting, Michael. This is going to get really interesting.
View on that, because I mean, I imagine quite a lot of your readers might be somewhere between the Tories and Reform. How do you think the Reform thing is going to play out now that we know that Nigel Farage will not be a candidate, but Matt tells us that he will be active?
Yeah, we have also have Nigel writing for our paper today. It's a bumper edition. Everyone get out there and buy it. And I think it will be interesting because I think actually the Conservatives have made a mistake. I think they should have gone in November. I think the idea of Nigel Farage being out in America for the whole of the election campaign would have been much more sensible for them. Because he would have been out with his friend Donald Trump. He's made that clear that he wants to go and play a part in that election. He made that clear in the letter when he said when he announced that he wasn't going to stand in this election. Instead, what they've got is Nigel Farage not standing in a parliamentary seat, but making it very clear he will be on the campaign trail. He has a big event tomorrow where he will really go for the Conservatives on immigration. He's got various other campaign events lined up. And that is a real problem for them. So they haven't really neutralised that threat from reform there. Nigel Farage is obviously a big figure. He certainly attracts attention. And so that is a problem for them.
Yeah, but Liz Truss, she was talking about net zero. She thought that if the Conservatives focused on net zero and scrapping it, that would be a vote winner for them rather than that. And I also think, I'm not sure whether this is an immigration election. I don't really think it is myself personally. But what do you think about Liz Truss's idea? Either of you should go to Matt Goodwin.
Sorry, just to pick you up on that. No, I accept that this is not an immigration election. If anything, this is an economy cost of living election. That's the dominant issue for voters. I'm sitting in focus groups with voters all the time. But I would just come back to this point, Nana, because I do think it's important that remember that we've got a lot of polarization out there among the electorate. So for Labour voters, this election is about the economy, the NHS, and basically kicking out the Tories. But for the Conservatives, their number one issue above the economy and cost of living is stopping the boats and lowering legal migration. So what we've got are these, parallel worldviews, if you like. And this is where Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives are really in trouble because, nobody really is going to find Labour convincing on those issues. We see that in the polling. But at the same time, so much of this is a legacy of the last 14 years that it's going to be difficult, if not impossible, for Rishi Sunak to cut through. And by the way, I agree on this point about, having Farage over in America, because I think that's absolutely critical. That, in a way, listening to Farage yesterday on some of the shows and reading him in some of the print, it's very clear, actually, that he's going to be a lot more active in this campaign than a lot of people out there seem to think, doing the prime time shows. And now here's another question. I wonder who will end up doing the debates, if indeed Reform are included in the debates. I suspect that Farage will be giving Tice a lot of coaching for that. And I suspect that he'll be very prominent and active on the grassroots.
Let's just give Sam one last chance. Sam, a quick answer, if you would. The Sunday Express yesterday listed 5 reasons why Rishi Sunak had made the right decision over the 4 July election. 2 of them were that the economy is going to get worse and that there are going to be thousands of people arriving in small boats. Not very heroic reasons for being right.
Well, maybe not heroic, but practical. And when it comes to being a prime minister, I think you need to be practical rather than heroic. I don't think just believing in some kind of myth of your own greatness is necessarily the way to go. But I think, look, we all know there was never a good time for Rishi Sunak to call this election. I mean, it's marginal, isn't it? You either go in November, you neutralise the Farage thing, or you go now and just think, right, OK, let's just go to the country. We can't go on like this. And clearly, he has chosen that route. Would it make a difference? It's hard to tell. We will never know. But I think there was never really an ideal time to go this year.
Minister Matt Goodwin, thanks to you both.